What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Clutch Crew Sports YouTube channel. My name is Connor. I am the co-host with the most. You just got a little glimpse of Eric's Baller on a Budget podcast right there on Facebook. But today, we're going to be starting a new series on this channel. I've decided that I wanted to do a Formula One Power Rankings list. The season is coming up. It's back. It's going to be starting on July 3rd. And I thought, what better way to ring in the new season but with some power rankings, and that way we can add some more content to this channel, something outside of just the normal podcast, since we've been very limited with our podcast over the past few months due to COVID-19. We've only been releasing one episode a week, whereas we were doing 2 episodes a week before everything happened. So I decided that I would create this new series so that way we can get some more content, and Zach has approved and is interested to see what it's like. So I'm going to keep doing this. I'm probably going to do this during the season every 2 weeks. I was planning on doing it every 3 weeks, but with the shortened season and the way everything's been going, and also I evaluated a little more, and I thought every 2 weeks would be good. Give them 2 races to prove themselves, I guess, to move their way up the list and get a better ranking. I feel like doing it every week would probably be a bit of overkill, because I think every week power rankings works for the other sports like football. It works for that, and it works for basketball and baseball because they have multiple games every week, so you can determine everything from those games alone. But with Formula One, I think it'd be better just to do it every 2 weeks, just to space it out a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting. So so this is not going to just be since this is the first episode, this is probably going to be a little bit more of an informative episode, since I'm sure a fair amount of our fan base that is used to Clutch Crew Sports doesn't really know a whole lot about Formula One. So I'm going to not just be giving my rankings of the drivers, but also introducing the drivers to a lot of our viewers so that they can figure out who these people are and what what these people are all about. So, with that being said, all the Formula One fans out there will, of course, know who all these drivers are, but let's get right into the rankings, and hopefully this will inspire some of our viewers to go check out the season when it starts on July 3rd. So right off the bat, we're going to start with number 20, Nicholas Latifi. Now, Latifi is the newest driver into Formula One this season, and so obviously he's got no wins, no podiums, and but that's not the reason why he's at the bottom of this list. Now, last season we had 3 rookies. There was Alex Albon, Lando Norris, and George Russell. And I probably wouldn't have put any of them at the bottom of the list. Maybe I might have put George Russell at the bottom if I had done this last season, but I probably wouldn't have. So Latifi's not just here because he's the newest driver on the grid. There's a couple reasons. First of all, because he's coming into the sport racing for Williams, and Williams has had a rough couple of seasons. They finished last place in the Constructors' Championship in 2018 and in 2019. They actually only scored 1 point total all throughout 2019, and that was mainly because they were part of a race where like half the field retired from the race or got penalties that dropped them back. Um, so Williams has had a tough go. There was some, I guess, bright spots during preseason testing, but of course preseason testing doesn't really mean anything until the season starts. So, but they weren't looking like one of the fastest midfield teams, but they were looking like maybe they were 8th or 9th fastest above a couple of the other teams. But until I see it out there on the circuit, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna take everything with a grain of salt, because Williams, they've been struggling really bad over the past few seasons. And so also for Nicholas Latifi, now at least for George Russell's sake, his teammate, which we'll get to a little bit later on this list, the feeder series for Formula One is aptly named Formula 2. Now, Nicholas Latifi, he's been in the minor leagues per se, like Formula 2, GP3, all of those series for a long time now, and he hasn't really proven enough to me to really say that he's going to have a lot of success in Formula 1. Now, some of these drivers that have come into Formula 1, if they haven't won the Formula 2 series, they've been like former GP3 champions, or there was like another kind of minor league series that they won, and Latifi hasn't really won any of them. He spent, I think, 3 seasons in Formula 2, and he finally was the runner-up last year, so he wasn't even the Formula 2 champion champion. The Formula 2 champion's not going to be joining the grid. That was Nick DeVries. But I guess Williams and Mercedes, since Williams is part of the Mercedes school, saw something in him to bring him in. So Latifi is going to be there's going to be expectations for him. Obviously, George Russell set a high standard last season when it came to out-qualifying his teammate, so Latifi's going to be expected to perform. If not, then they can easily replace him and find someone else to take that seat. And obviously, he's going to have to make the best of working with some of the worst equipment on the Formula One grid, assuming Williams has not worked out their problems before the season. So, Nicholas Latifi at number 20. At number 19, we're going to have Romain Grosjean. Now, Romain Grosjean, he's a long-time veteran of Formula One. He's spent a long time in Formula One, and he's kind of been the face, I guess, of the Haas F1 team ever since they came into Formula One in 2016. And he's been part of some of their, I think I read a commentator said one time that he's been part of some of the best moments in Haas's history, and he's also been part of some of the worst moments in Haas's history. So, and obviously last season was probably one of the worst moments for the Haas F1 team in their short history, because when they came into the season, when they came into Formula One, they were a new team, so there wasn't a whole lot of expectation. I think they were ninth in the Constructors' Championship in 2016 when they joined, and they improved it a little bit over the years. Like they were eighth, I think, 2017 and 2018, or eighth in 2017. But then in 2018, they really shined and managed to finish in fifth place, which is the second best team on the midfield behind the big three teams of Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. So it was a huge accomplishment for a new team, only in their third season to finish in fifth place in the Constructors' Championship. And it seems like, I don't know what happened, but everything just kind of fell apart last year. And Haas was probably their worst showing in their entire history. And Romain Grosjean was obviously a big part of that. You know, the equipment can only be so much of the failure of the team. The drivers are also part of it too. And even though the equipment was definitely not up to snuff as it was the past season, Grosjean was involved in a lot of crashes, a lot of DNFs. I think he actually had more DNFs than anybody on the grid. And it was one of the major storylines last season was Romain Grosjean going to be brought back to Haas, and because of Nico Hülkenberg was going to be leaving his spot at Renault, and Romain Grosjean, you know, they could have easily signed Nico Hülkenberg to take Grosjean's place, but Haas, they've stuck to their guns. Gunther Steiner has said that they're a very loyal team, and I guess they're going to give Romain Grosjean one more shot, but it would definitely not surprise me if this was his last shot. And he's going to have to make the best of some poor equipment. Looking in preseason testing, Haas were the slowest of all 10 teams in preseason testing, so they probably have not quite yet worked out their kinks, but Romain Grosjean, he's very capable of being a good driver. I mean, if you see on the screen here, he's got 10 career podiums, which is definitely nothing to sneeze at. It's more than most of the drivers on the grid. You know, the only drivers on the grid, actually, that have more podiums than him are the ones who have, at least at one point in their career, raced for one of the big three teams. Grosjean is the only one who has not, so he's definitely very capable, although the last time that he was on the podium was in 2015. So ever since he's been to Haas, he has not been on the podium. But if Haas has shown anything, is that there are times when Haas can be very good and Romain Grosjean can be very good. But for right now, he's going to stick at number 19, a very poor 2019, and hopefully he can make it up in 28 and 2020. Now, at number 18, we've got his teammate, Kevin Magnussen. Now, Magnussen, he's been, I guess, I don't know if a lot of Formula One teams will have like a first and a second driver. Romain Grosjean for a long time had been the de facto kind of first driver at Haas. I think Kevin Magnussen, although officially he might not have taken that spot, but he's kind of taken over that spot over the past few seasons. He's been finishing ahead of his teammate. He had a fantastic 2018 season where he was one of the best drivers in the midfield, one of the reasons that Haas was able to finish fifth in the Constructors' Championship. But again, just a lot of poor. I think Kevin was probably more so hurt by the equipment than Romain Grosjean was. I think Romain Grosjean's failure and Haas's failure on his side was probably both the driver and the car because of all the DNFs. I think Magnussen was probably more hurt by the equipment than it was his driving. There was one incident in Canada where he did crash out of Q2, and he still would have started at least 15th. I can't remember what place he started at, but they had to go and rebuild the car overnight, and the car was not the same, and he was finishing even behind the Williams cars, which, during the season, the Williams cars were usually at least a second off of everybody else when it came to time. So the fact that he was finishing behind the Williams cars showed that the equipment was really not there, and Magnussen, even he was trying his best to get the best out of what he could do, and he tried his best. I mean, he was 16th in the drivers' championship, but he has not been able to find major success in the sport, and he not able to find major success last year. The only time he's been on the podium was 2014 when he was racing with Renault, and he's been in the sport for a while now. He's not quite as long time of a veteran as Romain Grosjean, but for a driver of what he possibly can do, it's surprising to see that he hasn't been on the podium again since 2014. So, but as long as the equipment is not there, I'm not putting a whole lot of faith in Kevin Magnussen, unfortunately. As much as I would love to see the Haas F1 team do great, considering they're the only American team on the grid, I just don't see good things for them in 2020. It's going to be, and as it use a football or basketball term, it's going to be a rebuilding season for Haas F1. So they're going to have to work things out, and possibly, I think Magnussen will be back in 2021 for Haas F1, but his teammate might not, and there might be some overhaul at Haas. I don't know how much Gunter Steiner is going to keep his job much longer if Haas keeps on this downward trend. Even though he was a big part of getting them to where they were in 2018, he's also at fault for them going down. So, number 18, Kevin Magnussen. So at number 17, we have George Russell, and this might be a bit high for George Russell considering that he finished in last place in the Drivers' Championship last season, but he's up here for a couple reasons. One, obviously, like I talked about before with Nicholas Latifi, with Williams being just a horrible car to drive last season and a horrible team last season. But if there was one bright spot out of George Russell last season and Williams, was that Russell, in all 21 races, managed to outqualify his teammate Robert Kubica, which is a huge accomplishment. If anybody, in any Formula One team can outqualify their teammate every single weekend, that's going to show that are probably you're probably more talented than the equipment that you're in. It's kind of like Fernando Alonso in 2018. Fernando Alonso is a very talented driver. He's probably one of the most talented Formula One drivers in history. But being stuck in a McLaren car that wasn't up to snuff, he wasn't able to get the results that he wanted, but he showed that he was still probably one of the best drivers in the sport because he outqualified his teammate in every race. And Russell did that last season. So is it a sign of someone who is going to be a fantastic driver if he's just given the right car to drive and being with the right team? There's been a lot of speculation that they might be bringing him to Mercedes next season because Williams is part of the Mercedes development, that Mercedes is maybe ready to move on from Valtteri Bottas and bring in George Russell. I don't know. He's had a lot of success in the minor leagues. He was the GP3 champion in 2017. He moved up to Formula 2 in 2018 and then immediately won that championship too. So does that mean that he's destined for a Formula 1 World Championship? Not while he's at Williams, but if he gets a chance at Mercedes, who knows? Obviously, he was only a rookie last season, so there's a long, long future ahead for George Russell. And if he can keep, if his form is as good as it was in 2019, then I think he'll do well in 2020, especially if Williams has managed to work out some of the bugs in their car and get it a bit faster. If he can continuously outperform Nicholas Latifi, if he can do the same thing to Latifi that he did to Robert Kubica in 2019, then I think there's going to be serious consideration for George Russell to be moved up to Mercedes. But for right now, as long as he's still in a Williams car, he's going to be near the back of the grid, unfortunately. Hopefully, maybe he can get at least a couple points this year since he got no points last season. So hopefully we'll see what he does this season. Then at number 16, we've got Antonio Giovinazzi, the first Alfa Romeo driver on the grid. And Giovinazzi, he's kind of in a prove-it season this year. There's any Formula One, well, I wouldn't say any Formula One fan, but a lot of Formula One fans know that when it comes to Alfa Romeo racing, now, Williams is the development team for Mercedes, AlphaTauri is the development team for Red Bull, and Alfa Romeo is the development team for Ferrari. Now, but the interesting part about the Alfa Romeo team is that the two driver's seats are not controlled by Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo doesn't get to decide who races in one of their driving seats, because for the most part, teams decide who they want in their team. Like nobody else has any influence. It's the team's decision who their drivers are. But at Alfa Romeo, one of their seats they get to control. Like they control who they want in that seat. That's the seat that Kimi Raikkonen currently occupies. He occupies the Alfa Romeo controlled seat at the team. Antonio Giovinazzi, however, he occupies the Ferrari controlled seat at Alfa Romeo, which means that at any time, if Ferrari doesn't feel that he is performing, whether the team feels like he's performing or not, if Ferrari doesn't feel like he's performing, they can replace him with somebody else. So Giovinazzi is definitely he's definitely going to be in a prove-it season, especially with the fact that Sebastian Vettel is going to be leaving Ferrari at the end of this season. Obviously, Ferrari has already announced a replacement driver, but if that replacement driver, I'm not going to mention who it is yet if nobody's heard, but we'll get to it a little bit later on the list. But if that driver doesn't perform up to snuff, then Ferrari's going to be looking to Antonio Giovinazzi to possibly replace him in the next season. And if Giovinazzi doesn't perform, then he's going to be losing his seat next season, kind of like how Marcus Ericsson lost his seat at Alfa Romeo in 2019. And he did show signs of improvement, though. Alfa Romeo is another one of the teams that are probably hampered by a little bit poor equipment, but he did finish in 5th place in the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. That was a fantastic performance for him. Obviously, that race had a lot of surprises in it last season, with 2 drivers on the podium for the first time, and there was a lot of DNFs and not a lot of crashes, but there were a lot of big time DNFs, I should say. Like both Ferrari drivers and Valtteri Bottas retired from that race. So, and then there was the incident with Lewis Hamilton and Alex Albon at the end. So, it definitely was a race that was for the midfield drivers to shine. And when you get the opportunity to shine as a midfield driver, you have to take advantage of it. And Giovinazzi did that at the Brazilian Grand Prix. He did take advantage of it at the German Grand Prix too. I think it was either 7th or 8th, but unfortunately both Alfa Romeo drivers got penalized in that race, so he didn't finish in the points. That would have been another good finish for him had it not been for the penalty. So Giovinazzi's looking up. He's looking okay, but I'm not hopeful for him when it comes to keeping his seat for next season. I don't think he's proven on a consistent basis that he can be a prospect for Ferrari, and Ferrari's going to want to put a younger driver in that seat, someone else who they can develop and possibly put into their team in the future. Now at number 15, we've got Lance Stroll, the first Racing Point driver on this list. Lance Stroll. Now Lance Stroll, he's probably one of the most protected drivers on the grid because his dad does own the Racing Point team, so it's unlikely that Lance Stroll's ever going to lose his seat at the team as long as his dad is there, unless he's just performing absolutely atrociously. And I'm always questioned, does he actually deserve to be at the Racing Point team? Now, he started his career with Williams, which I think fit him well. I don't think he's as talented as some of the other drivers on the grid, but Williams was a good start for him. Then he got the move up to Racing Point, which is hoping to be a top tier team coming up here in the future. They're obviously going to be switching over to become Aston Martin Racing in 2021. But Lance Stroll needs to prove more. He needs to prove that he can finish in the points and that he can qualify outside of Q1. He went on a long streak of not being able to get out of Q1 in qualifying, which is not good for a team which is supposed to be probably the second or third best in the midfield. There's kind of like Williams and Alfa Romeo and Haas kind of at the bottom, and then up in the next tier you got Racing Point, McLaren, Renault, and AlphaTauri. AlphaTauri is probably actually supposed to be lower than Racing Point, and the fact that Lance Stroll finished below both of the AlphaTauri drivers last season was pretty horrendous. So now, he does have one podium to his name that came a very unlikely podium in the 2017 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and he did finish 4th place in the 2019 German Grand Prix. He was very close to another podium, but that was more of a strategy, like a good call on strategy, than his actual driving skill, in my opinion, because he was in 14th place. It was either 14th or 15th place that he was in before they made the correct strategy call to put the slick tires on at the right time and get into position to possibly maybe even maybe even win the race had circumstances worked out. Because once everything cycled around, he was in first place in the race, and he just kind of slowly dropped down when the faster drivers got there, and his tires were also old. So, but his position, like I said, was more of a strategy benefit than a driver skill benefit. So Lance Stroll, I think he is going to have a little bit of pressure on him this season. Probably not too much because, like I said at the beginning, his dad owns the team, so he's probably not going to lose his seat anytime soon. But if he does start to, keep consistently finishing, in the bottom half of the constructor or the driver standings, and even the bottom quarter of the constructor standings, he finished 15th. He's right on the cusp of being, in the 25th percentile, which is not good for a team that's having high aspirations. How much longer is his dad going to be patient with him and wait for him to get the results that his teammate, which we'll talk about later on this list, has been getting his whole career? So we'll see for Lance Stroll. Another driver that I probably don't have too high hopes for because I still don't think he deserves this seat at Racing Point, but maybe he'll prove me wrong and he'll do better than I think he's going to do. So at number 14, we have the Iceman, one of my favorite drivers, Kimi Raikkonen. A long, long history of success in Formula One. As you see, 21 wins, 103 podiums, and a former world champion in 2007, and went in a fantastic title fight at Brazil that season. But Kimi Raikkonen, unfortunately, he's near the end of his career. He's actually probably, if rumors are true, he's probably going to retire at the end of this season. He's 40 years old, and it's a young man's sport, and he's not in the position to win a championship again. Obviously, he made the move to Alfa Romeo last season, as Ferrari wanted to bring in Charles Leclerc, so he no longer has championship winning equipment underneath him. But the thing for Kimi Raikkonen, I would like to put him higher, and because the thing is, he still has all the talent in the world. I mean, he showed that in 2018. He finished, at age 38. He was still obviously he was racing for Ferrari at the time, but he still finished in third place in the drivers' championship at that age, and it just shows that he still has all the talent in the world to, compete if he had the right equipment. And I think it's more so Kimi is just ready to finally retire and settle down. And, you know, I'm not going to say he doesn't have the passion for racing anymore, but it's definitely not what it once was. So it's why I've got him this low on the list. And also his equipment, like I said, Alfa Romeo is probably one of the bottom three teams when it comes to their equipment. So Kimi will definitely get the most out of the machine that he can. Obviously, he finished in 12th place in the Drivers' Championship when his team was finishing 8th in the Constructors' Championship, which is a pretty big accomplishment when if your team is finishing 8th in the Constructors' Championship, you should be finishing 15th or 16th in the championship. But when you're finishing 12th, it shows that you're getting more out of the car than the car is capable of. So I definitely think Kimi Raikkonen, he definitely could return to the podium at some point too. I wouldn't count him out for a podium finish. I do have, a little stat down here that he's finished on the podium in all but 3 of his 17 seasons, which is a major accomplishment. I think the only 3 seasons he didn't finish on the podium were his rookie season, this past season, and then I think it was 2016 when Ferrari was just not, the pace wasn't there for Ferrari, so he wasn't able to get up on the podium, but he's definitely one of the most successful drivers in Formula One history and one of the most talented. And like I said, there's going to be a couple of of those races this next season where the midfield is going to benefit because there's going to be retirements from the top 3 teams. And I think Kimi Raikkonen is definitely one of the drivers that could benefit from that and get on the podium at least one more time before he retires. So number 13, we have our first AlphaTauri driver, Daniil Kvyat. Daniil Kvyat's definitely had an up and down Formula One career. He's got more podiums than over half of the drivers on this list, that are in seats this year. And he's also had some very low moments. He started out a very promising career when he was back when AlphaTauri was still called Toro Rosso. He took Sebastian Vettel's place at Red Bull Racing when he moved on to Ferrari in 2015. A chance with a big name team. He actually outscored Daniel Ricciardo that season too. He got his first podium that season, but then Red Bull made the surprising decision to drop him in 2016 after only 4 races to bring and replace him with Max Verstappen, which obviously in the long run that's worked out very well for Red Bull considering how good of a driver Max Verstappen is, but it was still very shocking at the time because Kvyat was supposed to be Vettel's successor. him and Ricciardo were supposed to be, the next kind of Sebastian Vettel Mark Webber duo. I'm not sure which one was supposed to be, Sebastian Vettel and which one was supposed to be Mark Webber, but they were still supposed to be very successful as a team. And but then Kvyat got replaced by Verstappen. So, but Kvyat, he showed flashes of brilliance last season. AlphaTauri is, they're rebranded. They were Toro Rosso, now they're AlphaTauri. He did get back on the podium last season at Germany. He got a impressive third place finish. I think kind of the same thing with Lance Stroll, though. That was more of a strategy benefit than a driver benefit. Obviously, he stayed up in the podium position and Lance Stroll did not. So Kvyat was definitely doing something right. But again, I think that was more of strategy than of the driver. But he's definitely shown that he can be, he can get the best out of a car and he can be one of the best drivers in the midfield. So we'll see how AlphaTauri does this season. Their pace maybe isn't quite up to snuff with like McLaren and Renault, but I think they're right there. They finished in sixth place in the Constructors' Championship last season, which when nobody thought they would. And it's because I think they've got two very talented drivers. We'll get to the other driver later on this list, but the drivers definitely get more out of the machine than the machine offers. So number 12, we have making his return to the sport, we have Esteban Ocon. Now, Esteban Ocon, he spent 2 seasons with Force India in 2017 and 2018, and before he was replaced in 2019 by Lance Stroll, and now he's making his return to Formula One with Renault. He is taking Nico Hulkenberg's seat, and I think it's going to be a good year for Esteban Ocon. Obviously having a year away from the sport, he wasn't away from the sport completely. He was a test driver for Mercedes in 2019, but test driver, you're not out there on the track racing against everybody. So I'm still going to say he had a full year off of driving in the championship. So there's going to be some rust, but Renault is obviously up there with McLaren as fighting for the best team in the midfield right now. So he's going to have the equipment, and he seems like he's got the talent. When he was at Force India, he was getting consistent points finishes. You see my stat that I have. He finished with points in all but 2 races in 2017, which is very impressive for any midfield driver to actually finish in the points in almost every single race. Because there's going to be races with midfield teams where their car isn't, exactly right for a circuit, or they're going to have DNFs, or their equipment's going to fail, and you're not going to finish in the points in a high majority of the races, I would say. But the fact that he did it, excuse me, in 2017 was very good. So, and again, Renault is one of the top midfield teams. I am putting him in the lower half of this list, though, because of his year off. Had he been, still in the sport, maybe racing for another team, I'd probably put him higher on this list, but I can't justifiably put him in the top 10 of this list with the other, top midfield drivers after having a year off. Number 11, we're going to have the fallen Red Bull Racing driver, Pierre Gasly. He kind of had a very similar story, I guess, to Daniil Kvyat when it came to Red Bull Racing, even though they gave him a little bit more of a chance, I guess, than they gave Kvyat. Kvyat got he had a full season under his belt, but then they replaced him after only 4 races. They gave Gasly the whole the first half of the season, and he just wasn't performing. I think a lot of the analysts were talking about, and even the commentators were saying, just watching the race, that they think the pressure got to Pierre Gasly a lot. The pressure of driving for such a big name team like Red Bull Racing, and the expectation to perform really got to him, and he just kind of failed. Because after he went back to Toro Rosso last season, he started to show that brilliance again, that the reason why Red Bull wanted him in the first place. He started driving really well again, and he got a second place finish at the Brazilian Grand Prix, which is huge for any midfield driver. When you see red midfield drivers getting podiums, they usually kind of sneak into third place, maybe through some strategy or something like that. But no, he ran near the front of, he was running sixth place in the Grand Prix all day. And he benefited from those retirements in the race from the Ferraris and from Valtteri Bottas, and he worked his way up to second place. No strategy helped him out there. That was pure driving. He did have the benefit of some retirements, but his driving was what got him up there. So I'm not sure Red Bull decided that they were going to stick with the current driver lineup, which I think was the right decision. I think it was the right decision to let Alex Albon keep the seat at Red Bull, given how well he had performed over his time with Red Bull. So Gasly's obviously definitely going to be looking to regain favor with the team and possibly, take that seat back, because there's only one seat at Red Bull that's going to be competed for. Nobody's going to be competing with Max Verstappen for his seat. So Gasly's going to have to compete with Alexander Albon for that second seat at Red Bull. And he's going to be looking for big things. AlphaTauri, again, like I said, they had some promising looks in testing, and they did finish in sixth place in the Constructors' Championship. But this is going to be a telltale season if they're going to be on par with Renault and on par with McLaren to battle for best of the rest in the midfield. So then at number 10, we have the first McLaren driver, Lando Norris. He was a rookie last season, and I think Lando Norris was definitely, he was, how am I trying to say this? A victim of unfortunate circumstances. He had a lot of engine problems and a lot of car problems in 2019 that probably led to his low finish in the drivers' championship. You see, he finished 11th, but McLaren itself finished 4th in the constructors' championship. So, um, it definitely shows that the equipment is there if it can hold up. And Lando Norris is a very talented driver. He had a couple really nice finishes. I mean, like I said, he had two sixth-place finishes in 2019, and he was the runner-up in the 2018 Formula 2 championship. So he definitely is capable of getting good finishes if the car will just hold up. And I think the big key for him is going to be to get those finishes when the car does hold up, because he did have the excuse last season of, oh, well, stuff was breaking on my car. I had to, I think he had the second most retirements behind Romain Grosjean. So, he could say like, oh, my car wasn't holding up. That's why I wasn't getting points. Stuff kept breaking, blah, 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 blah. Well, if stuff isn't breaking this season and the McLaren car is more reliable, then he's not going to have that excuse anymore, and he's going to have to perform up to the level that Carlos Sainz performed last season with the team. So, there's big expectations around McLaren this year. The challenge the kind of coming from out of nowhere last season, really. I don't think anybody expected that they were going to finish in 4th place in the Constructors' Championship last year after the way they had performed over the past 4 or 5 seasons. So there's a lot of expectation around McLaren now, and the fact that they've got 2 very talented young drivers, and the fact that Lando Norris is going to be, he's going to have a new teammate next season, which we're going to get to a little bit later. And he's going to want to compete. He's going to want to be the number 1 driver on the team. He's going to want to show that, yes, when you give preferred strategy and you give preferred, treatment, you want to give it to me. You don't want to give it to this new driver coming in, because I'm the future. I'm the young driver. I'm the best. I'm destined to be a world champion. So this is Lando Norris. If I had to make a list of drivers that have a lot of pressure on them, he's definitely near the top of the list for most pressure this season. So at number 9, we've got Lance Stroll's teammate, Sergio Perez. Like Romain Grosjean, another longtime veteran of the sport, and he's been with Force India pretty much since its inception. I don't know if he was there the first season, but he was there very near the beginning when it began, and obviously now it's Racing Point, and he's stuck with them this whole time, and they don't seem like they want to move on from him anytime soon either. He's just kind of there. He's a very consistent points finisher. And as you see, he's got 8 podiums in his career, and he had a very recent podium. A lot of these drivers that are veterans that have a decent amount of podiums, their last podium was like kind of way back in the past, kind of like with Romain Grosjean or like with Kevin Magnussen. But Sergio Perez, he had a podium finish in 2018. I think it was Azerbaijan that he was on the podium. He was 3rd. So obviously no podiums last season, but for a midfield driver, you kind of want to average like 1 podium maybe every season or every 2 seasons, and you're still going to look very good. So, and obviously the team has high expectations. Making the move to Aston Martin Racing in 2021, they want to prove that they're the best of the midfield, and Sergio Perez is their guy. He's been the guy since the beginning. He's getting towards the end of his career, though, in my opinion. He's getting older, and unless he really gets a chance with one of the bigger teams, which I don't see happening, I'm not sure how much longer he's going to stick around. Unless Aston Martin can transform themselves into this juggernaut of a team, I don't know how much more motivation Sergio Perez is going to have to stick around for too much longer. But he's definitely a very consistent driver, and he's definitely worthy of this number 9 spot. So number 8, we have Daniel Ricciardo. Now, this is going to be the start of the kind of driver trio swap that is going to be going on in 2021. So obviously with the big news with Sebastian Vettel going to be leaving Ferrari in 2020 or after 2020, That left an opening at Ferrari. Ferrari jumped on and got a new driver. And if you, I guess I'll spoil it now since you can see, they're going to get Carlos Sainz to race at Ferrari in 2021, and Daniel Ricciardo is going to take his spot at McLaren in 2021. Now with Ricciardo, I still have high expectations for him with Renault in 2020. Obviously, Renault was the second best team in the or second best midfield team in the constructors championship in 2019. And Ricciardo's a supremely talented driver. I mean, he had a nice lengthy career at Red Bull, 7 wins, 29 podiums, and it was definitely a shock when he decided to make the move to Renault in 2019, but he's another one of those drivers that can get the best out of any machine, and he's probably got the best personality in Formula One, which also doesn't hurt. He's probably the funniest and the most easygoing driver in Formula One, and I would love to see him return to success and maybe get another win. I think it was a mistake for him to leave Red Bull Racing. I know it wasn't just the fact that he didn't have trust in the Honda engine and maybe didn't trust the car's performance, but he wanted to get away from the situation with Max Verstappen because he felt like anybody who's watched F1 Drive to Survive on Netflix knows that he felt a lot of pressure, and he felt like the team didn't really care about him anymore because they had invested all this money in Max Verstappen that, Ricciardo didn't mean anything anymore. So he's trying to make his own name for himself. He made a name for himself before Verstappen, and now he's trying to do it again. He's going to have another young teammate beside him this season in Esteban Ocon, and he's going to have another young teammate next to him in McLaren in 2021 with Lando Norris, assuming Lando Norris stays there, which I'm pretty sure he's going to. But he's gonna have to prove that the old time veteran is still, he's still up to snuff, and I think he still has it. He proved last season that he does, finishing ninth in the drivers championship. I think he still has what it takes to be a winning driver. And honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing him possibly get a spot at Mercedes in 2020 if they or 2021 if they decide that they're going to move on from Valtteri Bottas sometime in the future. If maybe after 2021 he gets another chance with one of the big teams like Mercedes or Ferrari or Red Bull, because I remember when they were talking about drivers to replace Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari, Ricciardo was immediately one of the names that popped up because he still has the talent. So we'll see how he does with Renault this season, and obviously, with McLaren kind of working their way back up into the top tier of teams, we'll see how he does with McLaren in 2021 if he can return to the podium and return to the top step of the podium as a race winner once again. So number 7, we have the last of the midfield drivers, Carlos Sainz. Obviously, a performance that came out of nowhere, honestly, last season. 6th place in the Drivers' Championship. He finished ahead of Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly, who were the two, Red Bull drivers that swapped. So, I mean, major props to him for coming in the top 6 in the championship. That's a huge accomplishment for a midfield driver. And obviously, McLaren is back to where they're not quite back to where they hoped to be, but they're getting there. They're getting their 4th place in the Constructors' Championship. Sainz finally got his first podium at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix, and just a very good overall season. I mean, not counting Gasly and Albon, Sainz was, who were racing at Red Bull Racing, because if Albon/Gasly had stayed at Red Bull Racing the whole season, he probably would have only finished in 7th. I highly doubt he would have gotten 6th place, but he was well clear of everybody else in the midfield. I mean, 93 points for a midfield driver is outstanding. It's something that you would think that someone who was like a second driver at a top tier team would be in that range. But no, he's in a midfield team and he's finishing in the championship well ahead of everyone else. So, and it's probably the reason why I already mentioned this on the previous slide, but in 2021, he's going to be getting the seat at Ferrari. He's going to be taking Sebastian Vettel's seat. So there's a lot of pressure on him this season as well. Not only his teammate Lando Norris has a lot of pressure, but Sainz does too, because he needs to keep performing at that level. I'm not saying he needs to win races, but he at least needs to keep, being in the top tier of the midfield as long as the McLaren equipment is still underneath him, and proving that Ferrari made the right decision to bring him in, because they had other candidates. Like I mentioned, they had Daniel Ricciardo. They were probably thinking of a couple other drivers too, but they made the decision to go with Carlos Sainz, and Sainz needs to prove that that decision was warranted and that he is worthy of that Ferrari seat. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of criticism around him, and there's going to be a lot of criticism of Ferrari as well. And I know some of the drivers are going to be unhappy that they missed out on a seat if Sainz isn't performing at the level that he should be. So finally, we're now to the top six. The six drivers, two for each of the top three teams, and we're going to start with the second Red Bull driver, Alexander Albon. I'm looking for big things out of Alexander Albon this season. He obviously started last season at Toro Rosso. Halfway through the year, they gave him Pierre Gasly's spot at Red Bull Racing, and I think he's going to perform really well. If you look at one of my stats here, actually both stats at the bottom of the list, he had a top six finish in every race but one last year since he made the move to Red Bull, which is very, very impressive, because when you're racing for one of the top three teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, you want to be finishing in the top six, because that's where the car performance is, and that's where you should be finishing. If you're finishing outside the top six, like Pierre Gasly was doing a lot in 2019 before he moved back, like when he was racing with Red Bull, that looks really bad on the driver when, you've got the equipment, but you're not taking advantage of it, and you're not getting the most out of it. So Alexander Albon definitely had a very impressive 2019, and obviously you see my other stat. I talked about that there was one race that he didn't finish in the top six, and that was at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2019. Which the reason why he didn't finish in the top six in that race was because he was on par for a podium, and he got spun around by Lewis Hamilton on the second to last lap. Hamilton was running third, Albon was running second, and Hamilton was trying to get up in the podium spot, and Hamilton spun him around and cost him a podium at Brazil and cost him a top six finish too. But that was the only hiccup on his season since moving to Red Bull. Other than that, he was fantastic. He exceeded all expectations. And I was really happy that Red Bull decided to stick with him rather than trying to go back to Pierre Gasly or, maybe giving someone else a chance. That they were like, all right, you've proven to us that you are capable, so we're going to let you keep the seat. So now, obviously, the pressure is that he needs to get more consistent top finishes, and he needs to start finishing on the podium a little bit more consistently. I'm not saying he has to win to really prove to Red Bull that he is capable, but he needs to finish on the podium at least a few times next season if he's going to want to keep his seat, because I know Pierre Gasly is going to be hungry to get that seat back, and there's other drivers in the Red Bull development team that are going to want that seat as well. So Albon needs to start finishing on the podium, and he needs to start. I mean, and it wouldn't hurt to get a win in there. I'd love to see him win a race because he's got the equipment to do it. If Max Verstappen has shown anything, is that even though Red Bull is definitely the third best team, they, at least they have been for the past few seasons. They could be the second best team next season. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but they've shown that, the equipment can win races. So it'd be nice to see Alexander Albon win a race. And obviously, like I said, needs to finish on the podium with some regularity. So at number 5, we've got the four-time, well, I almost said 5-time, four-time world champion Sebastian Vettel, and definitely a fall from grace last season for Sebastian Vettel. I mean, he's one of the most successful drivers in Formula One history, 53 wins, 120 podiums, a four-time world champion, like I said, but definitely probably one of his worst seasons in quite a while. Last season. Obviously, 2014 and 2016 were also down years, but I think really this was probably had to be the most disappointing out of all of his disappointing seasons. Because in 2014, Red Bull Racing, that was like when Mercedes first came into the sport, and Red Bull Racing kind of lost some of their pace, and the car wasn't there for him. And also the same in 2016, the car wasn't there for Vettel to really perform really well in 2016, but the car was there last season. It definitely wasn't better than the Mercedes car, but it was there for him to get wins and get podiums on a consistent basis. And it was a lot of driver errors last season. There were a lot of unforced errors that Sebastian Vettel made, and really his only win last season came because Ferrari gave him the preferred treatment on the strategy at Singapore. Charles Leclerc out qualified Sebastian Vettel at that race, but then they allowed Vettel to perform an undercut and get in front of his teammate and let Vettel go on to win that race. So his really only win, like I said, came because the team gave him preferential treatment. And There was a lot of frustration with Sebastian Vettel last year because he knows that Charles Leclerc is the future of Ferrari and that, Ferrari wants Leclerc to be their guy and they know he's probably, in my opinion, he's going to be a future world champion. And it's kind of like, Sebastian Vettel's over here kind of saying, hey, like, what about me? I'm a four-time world champion. Why aren't you, paying attention to me? So, um, he definitely feels underappreciated. It's kind of like Daniel Ricciardo 2.0, but even more drama than it was between Ricciardo and Verstappen. Obviously, what happened at Brazil kind of destroyed the relationship between Vettel and Leclerc. Vettel, I mean, the crash, you could definitely maybe put blame on both drivers during that crash, but the crash was, in my opinion, it was more so Sebastian Vettel's fault. I mean, I'd probably put it like 70% Vettel and 30% Leclerc for that crash, which caused both Ferrari drivers to retire. And, I don't think the relationship between Vettel and Leclerc is healthy at all. I think there's a big rivalry between them. Vettel feels underappreciated. He feels threatened by Charles Leclerc, and which is why the big bombshell was dropped this and during the offseason that he's going to be leaving Ferrari after 2020. And now there's a big question around Sebastian Vettel. Is he going to race in 2020? Because Sainz has already taken his seat at Ferrari, and Ricciardo's already swooped up that seat at McLaren. And Vettel, there's an open seat at Renault, and Renault offered him a contract, and Vettel said no. He denied Renault a chance to sign him. So the question for Vettel is that is he going to race in 2020 or 2021? Now I'm sure he's probably some of the rumors and some of the prospects are that, will Mercedes try and bring him in? Will they move on from Valtteri Bottas and will they try and bring Sebastian Vettel in? Honestly, I don't think that'd be a good move for Sebastian Vettel because if he felt threatened by Charles Leclerc, he's going to feel even more threatened by Lewis Hamilton because, Mercedes, there's no way Mercedes is going to give Vettel preferential treatment over Lewis Hamilton, given all the success that Lewis Hamilton has had over his Formula One career with Mercedes. So if Vettel felt underappreciated at Ferrari, then there's no way he's going to feel appreciated at Mercedes either. So I'm struggling to find where Sebastian Vettel is going to be in 2021 because if he didn't want to race for Renault and McLaren's spot has already been taken, where is he going to go? I don't know where he's going to go. And the problem for him is that he's still young enough that I don't see a reason for him retiring. His talent is still there. He's only like 32 years. He's 32 or 33. He's younger than Lewis Hamilton is. So I don't see the benefit for him in retiring, but maybe he's just tired of racing. Maybe he's, ready to move on from the sport and maybe he's ready to retire. He thought, I've already accomplished everything I want to accomplish. I'm not appreciated anymore and it's time for me to go. So who knows? It's definitely going to be the story of 2020 and 2021. What happens with Sebastian Vettel? And I'm really curious to see how he does this upcoming season because Ferrari did not look exceptionally fast in preseason testing. They looked like the third best team, which is not good news for them when they were hoping to finally try and challenge Mercedes. But now they're getting, their times are slower than Red Bull Racing's was in testing. So I don't know how Sebastian Vettel is going to do. I'm He's obviously going to finish on the podium, but is he going to return? Is he going to win a race next season? I don't know. If Ferrari's equipment isn't there, and then because he's definitely got the talent, but if the equipment isn't there either, and he's not, his head isn't all there because he's still so focused on, Charles Leclerc, I don't know if he's going to win a race next season. He could retire from the sport without, winning a race in his final season. I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case. So, major storyline surrounding Sebastian Vettel. We'll see how it goes. So number four, we've got the runner-up from last season, Valtteri Bottas. Valtteri Bottas, unfortunately, as much as I like him, he's never going to win a championship. At least as long as he's with Mercedes, they're always going to prefer Lewis Hamilton. They're always going to give Hamilton preferential treatment. And Valtteri Bottas is kind of just like, he's like a career second driver, I guess I'll say. He's kind of like Mark Webber was with Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull. Like, he's the supporting driver, and he's not there to win championships. He's there almost in a way to help maybe not help Lewis Hamilton win championships. In a way, he is because like a lot of times they use him to like protect against the other drivers. Like if Hamilton's out front, Bottas will be running in second, like trying to hold up the other drivers that are trying to run down Lewis Hamilton. And Bottas is he's like again he's like I said never going to win a championship, and hopefully for his sake, I hope that he actually does move on from Mercedes next season and maybe try and find something else, because I think he does have the talent. I mean, last season showed it too. He was after everybody else had already fallen away from the championship, he was the one competing with Lewis Hamilton for the championship. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe this is the reason why I've got him at number 4 instead of number 2. Because normally you would think, oh, the runner-up last season would be number 2, but I've still got him down at number 4. Obviously, Mercedes in preseason testing, they were still the fastest, so they still probably have the best car. But the trick for Valtteri Bottas is going to be he needs early results. He needs a lot of early wins and early podiums to show Mercedes that he can compete for the championship, because you know Mercedes, if they give team orders to Valtteri Bottas to let Hamilton pass or not pass Hamilton or whatever, if Hamilton's already 100 points clear in the championship, then they're pretty valid team orders. Like, you can't get mad at that. But if he's competing with Lewis Hamilton, he's kind of only 5 points behind, or he's even ahead in the championship. Mercedes can't justify giving team orders to him to allow Lewis Hamilton preferential treatment. So he needs early results. He needs to show early on that he's going to compete for the championship. Otherwise, he's gonna fall away into the standings of the championship again, and Hamilton's going to run away with the crown again. So I definitely think he's one of the drivers that could compete with Lewis Hamilton. He's the first of 3 drivers that I think could. I don't think Sebastian Vettel is going to compete with Hamilton this season, but Bottas is the first of the 3 drivers that I think can take the crown from Lewis Hamilton if he gets those early results and if he gains more favor within the team to show that you can't be giving preferential treatment to Hamilton all the time, because I'm also out here trying to win a championship. So number 3, we have Charles Leclerc, the second of the Ferrari drivers on this list, and big bright future, I think, in my mind, for Charles Leclerc. I do think he's going to be a world champion at some point in his career. The equipment at Ferrari hasn't quite been to where it should be to maybe allow him to compete with Lewis Hamilton, but he showed flashes of brilliance last season. I mean, 2 wins and 10 podiums in your first full season at a top tier team is very impressive. And like I said in this graphic here, he outscored Sebastian Vettel, and he outscored Sebastian Vettel pretty comfortably. There wasn't any real threat from Vettel getting around him in the championship towards the last few races of the season. So, and Ferrari, they've shown that they're going all in on Charles Leclerc. He's not going to have the pressure from Sebastian Vettel after Vettel leaves in 2020, and he's going to be the true number 1 driver when Carlos Sainz comes in 2021. Because I think one thing that's holding him back is probably the fact that Ferrari still doesn't have a number 1 driver, because when Sebastian Vettel's there, Sebastian Vettel's a former world champion. Him and Leclerc are both top tier drivers. You can't really have a first driver and a second driver in that point, so you have to figure out who you're going to give the preferential strategies and treatment to. But when Sebastian Vettel's gone, now Leclerc is the true number 1. He's going to be the one getting everything. They're going to put their full support behind him, and he definitely is one of the most talented drivers on, him and Max Verstappen, I think, probably are competing for the most talented driver on the grid right now. And Leclerc has shown that he can win. He's shown that he can probably win a championship. He's shown that he can compete. He just needs to get around. I think he needs to lose Sebastian Vettel. He needs to lose the dead weight at Ferrari, and he needs to have an open road in front of him. And he needs to, this season especially, he's going to need to just kind of forget about Vettel, because Vettel's still going to be there. But I think if he can show Ferrari that he's the consistent driver, then maybe they'll start to make that shift earlier than next season anyway. Because as long as Vettel is there, even though he's going to be going out the door, they're still going to want to give Vettel treatment. They're still going to want to make him happy, because they know how talented Vettel is. But if Leclerc can kind of show to them at the beginning of the season, oh, hey, I'm the one out here winning races and getting on the podium, and Vettel is sucking, and he's going out the door anyway, so why don't you start giving me all the preferential treatment? So that's going to be important for Leclerc, and like I said, he's going to be a world champion in the future. It's just going to take some time. Ferrari needs to get their car better, and again, he needs to lose the dead weight. So at number 2, we've got Max Verstappen. Like I said, him and Charles Leclerc are probably competing for the most talented drivers on the Formula One grid. And Max Verstappen, I think this is probably the first season where I think he's really going to challenge Lewis Hamilton for the world championship, because obviously in 2017 and 2018 he had Daniel Ricciardo to deal with, and last season Red Bull was still kind of working out some kinks with their car. But this season, if preseason testing is going to indicate anything, it's that Red Bull is right there with Mercedes for the best car on the grid. They had the second best times in testing behind Mercedes. And Max Verstappen definitely has the talent to get it done. He wins races, he gets on the podium, he competes with them all the time. He just needs to compete on a more consistent basis. And Verstappen doesn't have he doesn't have the dead weight on his team like Leclerc does. Leclerc still has a world champion winning teammate on his team. Verstappen has a young, obviously Verstappen's young too, but Verstappen has a newbie on his team as his teammate for the most part. So Verstappen's going to be the one. He's the true number one driver at Red Bull, and he's going to get everything from the team, their full support. And he definitely has the talent to get it done. I don't know if this is going to be the year that he's going to win the championship. I don't know if, you know, he's going to be able to take it from Lewis Hamilton this year, but I think he's going to be Hamilton's biggest rival this season. Is going to be Max Verstappen, and it's going to be interesting to see how he does, especially with the shortened season. Everybody's going to need to get off to a fast start. If you get off to a slow start, you're going to be screwed because there's not enough races. But Verstappen is definitely my number one challenger to Hamilton. So finally, as I've been mentioning him a lot throughout this list, number one, the six-time and reigning world champion Lewis Hamilton. I mean, there's not much else to say about Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he's probably one of the greatest drivers, if not the greatest driver in the history of Formula One. He 84 career wins, 151 podiums, 6 championships. He actually has the opportunity to pass Michael Schumacher on the all-time wins list in 2020. I think he's 7 races behind Schumacher because Schumacher is 91, so he probably won't pass him this season, but he'll definitely get close. And until somebody, there's been for years now, people have been saying, like, oh, this year it's going to be Sebastian Vettel, and this year it's going to be Charles Leclerc, and this year it's going to be Max Verstappen. Well, so far, nobody's managed to knock Lewis Hamilton off his top step. No one's taken his crown yet. And until somebody shows something other than, until somebody shows something more, I don't see any reason to justify saying that Lewis Hamilton is not the top driver in Formula One right now. I don't think he's the most talented driver in Formula One right now. I think Verstappen and Leclerc are probably a bit more talented, but Lewis Hamilton's obviously still up there. I mean, he's probably like third or fourth behind them, and he's got the best car behind him, and he's got the experience. So there's nothing keeping Lewis Hamilton, in my opinion, other than himself, from winning a 7th world championship this season. And if he performs at the level that he's used to, then yeah, we're going to see him win a 7th world championship and possibly, pass Schumacher on the all-time wins list, depending on how long the season is and how many opportunities he has to win races. But I think that is going to wrap it up. That is going to be the first edition of the Formula One Power Rankings. A little bit longer of an episode, obviously, because this is a bit of an introduction. The episodes in the future are going to be shorter. They're going to be more concise, and they're going to be fun to do. I'm really looking forward to putting this out on a bi-weekly basis, and I hope you guys enjoyed them too. More content for the Clutch Crew Sports YouTube channel, and I hope my co-hosts Zach, Eric, and Nate enjoy watching these as well. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.